Hey everyone, thanks for joining this live stream. Just waiting on a few others to join. There he is. We got Eddie Hansen coming in from Apex Growth Solutions. Let's see here. View that. There he is. Hey, what's up, Eddie? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good, man. Can you hear me?
Yes, cool. Thanks for joining us on this. I hope this is a super beneficial conversation for everyone. Looks like we got people joining slowly. This is gonna be fun. So I'll just introduce myself. My name's Alex. I work for Meter Group on the team, on the AROYA team, and I am excited here to have Eddie Hansen from Apex Growth Solutions. He's a crop consultant. Eddie, how's everything going with you? Let me give us a little background on who you are and what you do right now.
This is my first live stream, so everybody give me give me a little bit of slack here. But things are going great for me, professionally and personally. I have a consulting firm. I'm located in Palm Springs, California. However, I have clients all over California and in other states. And basically what I do is I help provide support in creating standardized practices or bringing standardized practices to cultivation facilities so they can reduce their labor costs, reduce their overall operational costs, and increase consistency and quality in their production,
Mm-hmm.
and also production volume.
Right. That's great. So as cannabis legalization is a hot topic. It's going around the U.S. right now. Each state is facing their new round of obstacles. So being that you're in California, you're a little ahead of the curve as far as being a consultant in cannabis because it's the mecca. But what I imagine there's just a ton of need for what you do in this industry. And so what is the consulting market looking like right now? Are there a lot of Apexes, a lot of these companies that are popping up all over the US?
You know, this is, for a while I kind of dropped the word consultant
Yeah.
just because for some reason in the cannabis space the word consultant's kind of gotten like a bad rep, because anybody who's grown on a hobbyist level and has a little bit of success was considering themselves a consultant. And they would get into a larger scale operation, they'd bring on practices that weren't scalable, and then that left kind of like a stain on the word consultant. So there are, to answer the question directly, there are a lot of consultants in the cannabis space, and the kind of support that they provide can be hit or miss.
Got it. Got it. Understood. So your area of expertise is obviously in commercial cultivation. You have a huge wide background of helping growers all the way from mid-size, small scale, all the way up to the top. Can you kind of explain rough overview what your experience what have you done, I guess, from a commercial standpoint to just kind of help these growers? What is your background in consulting for some of these large corporations?
Uh, well, kind of my adventure in consulting began in 2020.
Got it.
Um, so what had happened is I kind of went into a neighboring facility and I noticed that they had an issue with spider mites. And I see pests as kind of like a plague that should be worked on if and when you have an opportunity to provide someone some support. So they were trying to poach me from the job that I had, and instead a light bulb went off. First, I provided them support for free. I was like, I just want to help you get rid of these spider mites. This is horrific, the level of spider mites you had. I got them on some products, a spray rotation, and then turned them on to some biological controls. And then from there, they were just really gunning to poach me from the job that I had at the time. And that's where a light bulb went off. It's like I already put forth the effort to help them out and stabilize their operation in regards to integrated pest management. And that didn't really impact my ability to do my other job. So I decided, you know what, I can help this person. And that's where had taken on the first consulting client.
Awesome.
So
Okay. So let's talk about these. Let's talk about clients and how people can maybe benefit from your services. So the way I like to break it down is there's these different segments of growers. There's the small scale home growers that are looking to expand. There's these mid-sized cultivators who think that they're ready to start crop steering and really need to just kind of find their groove. Then you have these large scale growers who are cranking, and they're the ones producing some of today's best weed. So you're let's say you have a mid-sized grower that comes and reaches out to you. They're kind of they want to learn more. They want to find out what data is available to them. What's the process at that point for you? What are you doing for them right out the gate to just kind of get the ball rolling?
that's a really great question. The first thing that I want to do is just kind of have a discovery call to kind of see like where they're at, what kind of equipment they might have on site, kind of get a brief understanding of some of the pain points of their operation. And then we would move into the first professional engagement, which would be a current state analysis would be performed of their facility. And that's where I would come to their facility, walk the facility for like 6 to 8 hours, depending upon the facility size. And I would make contact in every department and gather information that was important for me to understand to evaluate their KPIs or their key performance indicators. So understanding where they stand as far as infrastructure and equipment goes will give me an idea on how they can perform at the facility overall. So I can see like how many staff they have on hand. I can see what kind of lighting they have, what kind of HVAC they have, the tonnage they have per light, see what their capacity is to dehumidify any one of the environments or humidify the environments, because some people don't have humidifiers. See if they have a fertigation system, injection system, if they're hand watering, and then just kind of get a hands-on experience of what the day-to-day looks like inside the facility. And then from there, I would have, we could go on to having like ongoing services.
Got it. And understood. So you're going to spend the day with them. You're going to walk them through, what you're seeing, general observations, and then I would assume you produce a report for them. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I would, after the day, the visit was completed, I'd have like a broad overview with the ownership or management team. And then in 7 to 10 business days, I would deliver a report that outlined all of my findings, and then showing them all of the data that I had captured in regards to those KPIs, and then show them some of the pain points of their operation and how they can recover from those areas, with a detailed like roadmap to recovery.
Got it. So when they're reaching out to you, what would you say is the most enthusiastic aspect of these growers? What are they? What caused them to reach out to you? What are they really eager and itching to get their hands on?
It's most likely crop steering or increasing their grams per square foot, but there's a lot of hurdles to get through before we can start even talking about that most of the time.
Got it. So there's a lot of things that need to get buttoned up before you can even address the crop steering thing. So let's talk crop steering then. It's a good segue. We're talking data. So they're hungry for the data so that they have more insight into this black box, we call it, that is the substrate. So let's talk about how the data, first of all, impacts decisions that you make as a grower. So when you have AROYA set up in your facility, what are some of the data points that are your daily check-ins? What are some of the tools that you're using through AROYA to make sure that everything's dialed in correctly?
Well, obviously I'm using all of the sensors and devices that AROYA offers. I take that back. I have yet to outfit the DLI sensor at most facilities, but those are about to expand to increase their sensor densities and also incorporate some of this other these other forms of data collection. But the most important thing that I'm looking at is the graphical data coming in from the Atmos 14 and the Teros 12, and then making data-driven decisions from that information, and then also using the notes feature in the platform to apply notes to record any changes that have been made in either the environmental settings or in the irrigation strategy, be that in the EC that's coming out of the drip, or the volume of water, how many shots, so the shot size, how many shots, the time at which each shot is occurring, and then also kind of manually recording some of these light levels and stuff for the time being.
Got it. So AROYA is pretty much it's a given. It's what is needed in order to execute a lot of your procedures, your processes.
I would not be able to do what I do at the level that I do it if I didn't have access to this quantifiable data coming in such a clean way.
Got it. Okay. I mean, that's great. I mean, you said what I think a lot of people are thinking is if you can get your hands on the data, then the rest kind of unfolds there. So, so that's a lot of these mid-size and these large-scale growers that are reaching out and they're talking to you, and you're working with them to see how they can better this quality, whether it's grams per square foot, pounds per light, whatever. We have a lot of small-scale growers, home growers, if you will, that show a lot of interest in what Meter and AROYA have to offer here. Now, a lot of them are around data logging, how home growers, small-scale growers can utilize our sensors. How often would you say you're reaching out and you're helping some of these home growers, kind of navigate this world where they're trying to move into this next level of they're trying to move into a mid-size scale grower that can accommodate AROYA? How are you helping these guys get to that level? And what do you recommend?
I'm going to start with saying we all started somewhere. I started in the backyard. Now I'm here. That was 23 years ago, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I didn't have anybody to help me. So I had to mess a lot of things up to figure things out. And so if and when somebody who's a hobbyist level grower contacts me, I make sure that I spend a little time answering some of their questions, because I would have really appreciated that kind of help and support back when I started. Now, to the question at hand in regards to like hobbyist growers who all have a Solus sensor, a spot sensor from AROYA or Meter Group, my recommendations for how to get the best experience using that piece of equipment is to log your build out a spreadsheet to record your volumetric water content, your electroconductivity, and your temperature, along with your feed volume, EC and pH, as well as your runoff volume, EC and pH, all in one sheet. And then I would record this. You could also collect your environmental data on the same sheet. But to get the best experience out of the Solus sensor, I would recommend recording your data 3 times a day. That would be at the end of P3, just before your first irrigation event, so you can see how much they've dried back. I would measure data just after, or 15 to 20 minutes after your P1 has finished, because at that time, about 15 to 20 minutes, you should see the results of the last irrigation event change your substrate condition. And then I would also collect one more point of data, and that would be in the middle of your P2 or in the middle of your dry back period during the lights on phase. So I just pick some times right before P1 at the end of P3, 20 minutes after P1, and somewhere in the middle of the day, let's say hour 6 of lights on in your flowering period, or maybe hour 10 lights on of your vegetative period. And that'll give you an idea of what's happening to the EC in the substrate. After all of your irrigation events or during your maintenance period. So that'll also give you an idea if you're running a vegetative or a generative signal.
Got it. That actually, sets up for a question that just recently came in. What should I be aiming for to veg and gen steer when I'm hand watering? Hand watering is a big topic right now because people want to know how it affects crop steering, how it affects this data.
I I don't want to like, belittle hand watering. Again, we all started somewhere, and some people aren't ready to step up to these more advanced systems. Some people think irrigation systems are super easy. Again, we all started somewhere, so hand watering is where you're starting. That's fine. If you wanted to send a generative signal hand watering, just understand these basic concepts. The basic concepts for a generative signal are a lower volumetric water content and a higher EC, and then you have a longer dry back. We could go ahead and just kind of like forget about the dry back though, and we could just think about a lower water content and a higher EC. That's just a higher density solution or like a drought kind of condition at the root zone, and that's a generative signal. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a vegetative signal, and that would be the opposite of all of those other inputs. It would be a higher volumetric water content, a lower EC, and a shorter dry back. So if you're hand watering your hobbyist grow or your small scale operation, you would want to send a few irrigation events in the beginning of the day, or one large irrigation event in the beginning of the day, and allow for a long dry back, and that will help send a generative signal. And if you wanted to kind of like begin to send a vegetative signal, you could potentially irrigate or hand water 2 more times closer to lights off, and then achieve some runoff. The other thing you could consider doing to make sure that you have a vegetative signal is lower your input at the drip. So let's say you were feeding at like a 2.5 EC or a 2.0 EC in the beginning of your flowering period to send this generative signal. Once you start to hit vegetative bulking, then you could lower the EC at the drip and apply a few more hand waterings, and then one closer to the end of the day to help drop the EC in your substrate and build that volumetric water content.
Interesting. Got it. Okay, cool. I think that you just answered a lot of people's questions that are coming in right now. But that kind of makes me want to kind of dive into the Teros 12 sensor, which is something that Meter Group has spent a lot of time, effort, research putting into it. And whether or not you're a home grower or a craft cultivator, you have access to the Teros 12. So can you kind of explain the 3 data points we're pulling from it and kind of what your experience is using it, maybe compared to other sensors, or when you're comparing data that you've used in the past?
So for the Teros 12, the data that I'm most paying attention to is the electroconductivity and the volumetric water content. I am looking at the substrate temperature. However, the substrate temperature is usually just a couple of degrees lower than the air temperature within the grow environment. So as long as I don't see anything alarming in that area, like it's higher or extremely cold, I'm not really focusing too greatly on that. So then to move towards the differentiators between the Teros 12 and some of the competitor sensors, is I've seen the accuracy of the electroconductivity readings coming from these competitor sensors is lacking. So for example, I had a colleague who was using the Trollmaster water content sensor 1, and he just didn't have the capital to invest in AROYA and all these other things. So he was doing the best he could to get by. And I had delivered him some scientific set points to try and hit these targets in the substrate as a baseline to begin his crop steering adventures. Mm-hmm. And he kept reporting back to me that he couldn't even hit an EC over a 3.0 in the substrate, even though his feed EC was a 3.5. So if we think about this logically, my input is a 3.5 at the drip or at my watering wand, and my substrate conditions should be at least the same, but should be more than the feed EC, because we have dry back, and from the dry back there's accumulation of salts, and those accumulation of salts equal a rise in EC in your substrate. So if your feed EC is a 3.5 and your substrate conditions a 2 or a 3, there's something wrong with your sensor. And then he would have no runoff for days, which means there's just accumulation of salts building on each other day on day on day on day. And that could lead to an alarming issue if you don't have accurate sensor or accurate data coming in. So his EC and his substrate could have potentially climbed to a 30 or higher, but his sensor that he was using, because that's what he could afford, was only reading at like a 2 or a 3. So that's where it's important to have like these more sophisticated, more accurate sensors, because if you're going to be crop steering and trying to do these high performance like cultivating techniques, you have to have the high performance tools. You don't want to go into a Formula One race in a Pinto. You need a Formula One race car.
Right, got it. And in your mind, I guess it would be the Taros from Meter. So what is it about AROYA Meter Group that basically kind of ensured your confidence in these measurements? What was the biggest, what sold you on AROYA as a full platform?
Well, I started off on eGross, and I knew that that was manufactured by Meter Group, and I was working with Ramsey Nubani when he had worked at Grodan at the time. And he had moved over to working with Meter Group, and he just sold me on the value of the platform, the production platform, and understanding that it was the company that had made the eGross sensor. It just felt like a comfortable move for me. Like I had some data coming in, but I also had the added value of this production platform, and then being able to like log all of my historical data from every single harvest group, every single run. So whatever happened in a run, whether good or bad, we could look at what was going on in the data and make sure we did or didn't do that again.
Understood. Got it. So yeah, let's talk data. So someone already has AROYA. You're walking into their facility. You're doing your current state analysis. What are the first metrics you look at when you open their AROYA platform? What are you looking at first?
I'm looking at their environmental settings, like what's happening with. I'm looking at the Atmos 14 and the Taros 12, 100%. Most of the time they aren't recording information regarding like their irrigation event changes. So I just kind of look at the graphical data coming in and kind of see what they're doing in regards to irrigation and what kind of environmental set points they have, and then making recommendations on how to steer into the proper direction, be that in their vegetative area or whatever phase of flowering they're in.
Got it. So let's see, when you go in there, you're obviously kind of giving them from top to bottom an overview of all of the capabilities that AROYA has. So there's pest management, there's task management, there's journaling, there's a lot of different features that AROYA offers. What would you say is probably the most underutilized versus the most common and accurately utilized feature in the data side?
Okay, so the most underutilized is the readings.
Okay.
The readings features are super important if you have the capacity to collect some of those readings. So to collect your feed volume, your runoff volume, collect your plant height, also the feed EC and pH and the runoff EC and pH, to be collecting the stem diameter, the internodal spacing, the bud diameter, because if you change an input on the same varietal from one harvest group to another, if you're not collecting some of this data along the way, you might find in week 5 that your shift in approach is good or bad if you're looking at some of these readings.
Got it. Okay, cool. So talking about, let's shift a little bit. Maybe you can give me some information on the dry side of things. I know the meter, we have an aqua lab, but I'm curious as to like what your experience is on maybe the dry side, and what what your recommendations are, utilizing that new sensor in someone's facility.
So this is a big differentiator, especially when everybody's like growing ice cream cake, for example.
Right.
You could be producing some really top quality flour in your cultivation operation, but once it leaves the dry room and enters in post-harvest production, it could get ruined in a minute. well, that's an exaggeration, but fairly quickly. So I like to use the Aqualab water activity meter to make sure that it's exiting the dry room on the proper time, the proper day,
Mhm.
and that it's maintaining its quality all through the post-harvest process. So we're monitoring the water activity while it's in the tote curing. Monitoring the water activity while it's being trimmed, monitoring the water activity after it's been trimmed and on its way to distribution or packaging, and then also performing some consumer experience data based on like collecting some jars, seeing how they hold, or Mylar bags, whatever your packaged product is, and seeing how that product holds up or how it's landing into that package, because you might have your brand is co-packing.
I see.
Okay. And you might not be able to control the environment inside of this co-packer's warehouse or facility. So if you're seeing a consistent outcome land inside of the bag or the jar, you can adjust your input or how you're delivering it to them to make up for those changes. The other thing is that's important to know about water activity is quality is of concern, especially with this market volatility that we've all experienced. Uh, Again, if everyone's growing ice cream cake, having the best, most glistening, shining, blinging trichomes and the best terps that you can possibly have from your crop is crucial. So using water activity to make sure that your product isn't leaving the facility too dry, where those terpenes, those volatile compounds will kind of degrade much faster, is important. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you want to make sure that the product isn't leaving your facility too wet, because you run the risk of microbials and failing tests on microbials. So your product could go bad and fail for aspergillus fairly quickly if you're not monitoring your water activity. So right now, the dry and cure side of it has all been done through sensory perception. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? And I'm not saying that we should throw those things out the window. Those things are still important, because you're going to sense that at a certain water activity, these terpenes are being preserved better on that varietal that you're growing. And with other varietals, it might want a higher or lower water activity than with your brand.
Got it. Understood. I mean, that's all very helpful, and I know a lot of people are, I mean, you have such a plethora of knowledge. I can't imagine all of the notes people could be taking, and taking away from this. So
one thing I should mention, though, also that's super important about the water activity measurement is there's a potential for like 2% loss if you're not monitoring your water activity. So imagine if you're producing like 1,000 pounds a month,
mm-hmm.
You could be giving away 20 pounds of weed because you're sending it out too dry. And more often than not, I'll go into a client facility and I'll do a spot check of their finished product, and I'll find that is below the threshold. So that just means that they're giving away weed.
Got it.
So it's important.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed a few questions coming in that maybe they fit your expertise. So, how soon do you reach field capacity once lights are on? Time, number of irrigations.
So that depends on the type of substrate that you have and what the substrate's field capacity is. So you could reach a substrate's field capacity in a few irrigation events or several irrigation events. And we just kind of follow some of these basic concepts that you can find all over the internet on like what your shot sizes should be for your refreshment period or your P1.
Mm-hmm.
So people are typically feeding between like 3 and 6%. That doesn't mean you can't feed at 8%. So you might be able to reach your field capacity in 3 irrigation events. And the second part of that question was runoff.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, number of irrigations, the time, field capacity once the lights are on. Yeah.
So a good kind of like starting point is to begin irrigating your plants about 2 hours after lights on. And this is pretty pretty standard based on the size of your plant. So let's think about this. In veg, your plants are smaller, and to have like a vegetative dryback, or in your P0, some people call it, your vegetative dryback is a smaller dryback. It's like 3 to 4%. But your generative dryback in P0 would be somewhere around like 4 to 6%.
Mm-hmm.
So as the plant grows within that 2 hour time, the volumetric water content will drop around 4 to 6% in a large plant, whereas a smaller plant in the same substrate size in about 2 hour time will have a much lower dryback. So to begin your irrigation events about 2 hours after lights on, and then you can just follow the basic irrigation approach that's out on the internet that everybody's preaching, which is your generative signals or generative irrigation events are 30 minutes or less apart.
Got it.
And 4 to 6% in size. And then your vegetative signals are 30 plus minutes apart and usually about 1 to 3% in size. And how do you figure this out? You figure this out by looking at the graphical data that's coming in. So if I see I'm in a generative signal, and from day 1 to day 2, I saw that I had a loss of 20% in my volumetric water content from the peak to the valley. So from the end of P1 to the end of my P3 just before the following day's P1 events. That means I need to add at least 20% across my P1 to hit the same volumetric water content as the previous day. God. So splitting that up between in the P1 phase, using these basic concepts here, like I'm going to send shot sizes in 4 to 6% in size. So that means I could send 4% shots at least to hit that same volumetric water content from the previous day if I lost 20% from one day to the next. And those would be, depending upon the substrate size, they could be like, I sometimes run like 15, 20 minutes apart. Mm-hmm. And this is in like smaller substrate sizes. Now, if you have a larger substrate size, maybe you want to have your generative dryback occur over the course of 2, 3, maybe even 5 days. If you're starting off in like a 7-gallon pot, you're not going to irrigate every single day. You might just send a core shot just to keep the center of that plant, the root zone, stable, and allow the rest of your substrate to dry back. So if you want to hit a generative signal, that doesn't have to happen in one day or dry back in one day. Or you can lean on the basic concept of lower volumetric water content, higher substrate EC.
Understood. Okay. That actually would be a segue into my, I guess, a follow-up to that. So there's a lot of growers out there who are in the market for a good sensor. I'm not going to mention like any competitors or anything, but there are a few different sensors out there that do essentially kind of what the Taros 12 is doing in these substrates. How would you advise a grower of any size how to kind of test the accuracy of these and maybe do their own little bit of research to determine which one's right for them?
That's a great question, and I'll go back to the thing that I mentioned previously about my friend who was using the WCS1 from Trollmaster. Mm-hmm. Do a validation. Hydrate your substrate with 4.0 EC just as a test. Grab one sample, whether that be if you're using like a compressed cocoa block or a quick fill. Hydrate your substrate and see what the EC reading is. And then you can validate the sensor's accuracy simply by doing that before you start to go live with that sensor in your garden.
Understood. Okay, got it. Have you done one yourself? What have you found in comparison to other sensors out there? What are your findings that maybe you found?
I'm fortunate to have started with sensors that have been designed and developed by Meter Group on my commercial experience. And most of what I know about other systems is what I see happening at client facilities when I do a current state analysis, or from colleagues that are kind of just ripping their hair out trying to utilize some of these scientific set points and these crop steering strategies, but feeling frustrated about the data that's coming in.
Understood. Got it. Hey, that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Oh, here's a question that came in. What do you do if your PWEC is dropping during generative drybacks?
So this is something that pops up. I see it happen in graphs. I never get super alarmed, but sometimes what I see happen is that, just as you mentioned, the EC kind of falls with the drop in volumetric water content. And typically I see this happen when you have a lower volumetric water content that's kind of creeping towards like 20%. Um, you know, I haven't been too alarmed when I see this. I just see this as like an anomaly, or it just happens based on some conditions that are occurring within the substrate that are not consistent with other areas of the room or in another irrigation zone. If you see that the EC is dropping with the water content, I wouldn't be too alarmed.
Got it.
I
Understood.
would look at your plants. Again, look at the data, look at what's happening during the period at which the plant is transpiring. So like an hour after lights on and an hour before lights off, look at what's happening within the substrate during that time. And if you're hitting your targets,
Hmm.
I think you should be good. The one thing I would mention is avoid having large spikes where your EC is plateauing at 30 and staying at 30 during your P3. So that's just putting your substrate into like wild swings, and that's like basically making nutrients available on it. The density is changing so rapidly. The pH is fluctuating and rapidly. So I would just try to avoid that, and that would happen if your volumetric water content's too low.
I see. Got it. Cool. And then our buddy at Shark Mouse Farms just wrote, when bringing down the EC in late flower, are we increasing runoff and lowering nutrient strength, or just lowering nutrient strength and maintaining runoff and saturation percentage?
So so this is something that's kind of like come up a lot as people's approach to generative ripening or flushing and all of this stuff. Typically, what I do is I have the same EC input that I had during vegetative bulking, and then I switch to a generative strategy towards them to help induce ripening.
Ah,
And then you could have your own perceived experience on how the product finishes for you. Some people have a perception that having a EC content of 3 or lower at harvest will deliver a better tasting, a better like consumer experience, less of a harsh feeling on your throat. Um, but I'm typically having my EC at one level during vegetative bulking, and then there's a slight elevation in that because I've changed my irrigation strategy at the end in generative ripening. So I started sending generative signals that meant lower volumetric water content, which then led to a slight increase in my EC. So some people may have noticed this if they ran a generative signal for too long in the beginning of flower, their buds will start to look like they're finishing already. And that's because this drought signal or this generative signal is pushing the plants to finish. So I hope that answers that question.
yeah. I'm sure it's great. Anyone that has any last minute questions, throw them in here. Someone just said, just for clarification, what are you referring to when you say P1, P2, P3?
Okay, so P1 is your refreshment period. That's your first irrigation events that refresh your substrate to bring it back up to the water content that you're trying to hit, whether you're going with a generative or vegetative approach. Your P2 is the maintenance period where you're trying to maintain the substrate conditions, be that the water content, you want to see it kind of leveled off, but mostly like this, the EC in your substrate. So as you're sending these vegetative shots throughout the day to maintain your substrate condition, you're going to be looking at your EC.
Mm-hmm.
And then your P3 is your dryback. So the dryback is what's happening after your last irrigation event, whether that be you stopped irrigating after your P1 or refreshment period, or you stop irrigating after your P2. So it's the dry back. So the dry back is the what occurred from your last irrigation event from day one to your first irrigation event or just before the first irrigation event of day two. So no watering events is P3
Mm,
from
under,
one day to the next.
understood. Okay, I with knocking out these questions because people seem to really like what you have to say. Here's one. Have you noticed declining water content in Groden slabs over the flowering cycle, even when you're trying to hit your saturation from the day or week before?
Okay, so rock wool can become hydrophobic if you run the substrate the volumetric water content too low. So then you won't be able to get it to its original max field capacity. It has a new max field capacity. So also we have to consider what's happening inside the slab is that roots are beginning to populate this substrate, and that's kind of changing the way the substrate's behaving and its ability to retain uh, this water. So also, if you're irrigating your rock wool aggressively, gravity is a factor in rock wool. Those and what kind of slab are you running? If you're running a unislab that has a vertical fiber orientation, so if you irrigate too aggressively and send too large of irrigation events too closely together, you'll end up actually pushing water out of the substrate. The like a Grow Pro style slab, those have a horizontal fiber orientation, um, and it's a little bit more difficult for that to happen in. However, it's still possible for you to kind of push out some of that water by sending in too much water too quickly. But most likely what's occurring is that you've kind of potentially made it slightly hydrophobic
Mhm.
through taking it into an aggressive dry back or taking the volumetric water content too low. And what is too low, I think it's just below 25 to 20%. I would try to steer away from going lower than that, um, so you don't run the risk of having a hydrophobic substrate.
Cool. Well, I'm not going to keep hammering you with those questions because we could go all day on that one, and I'm sure everyone would.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to do just kind of like a final wrap up question. We were talking recently about how important the data is for these growers to just kind of level up, expand their grams per square foot. But you mentioned just the importance of having the right people. The right people in place is what ultimately matters. Can you just kind of explain what you meant by that?
So we can throw all of the sensors and devices and irrigation strategies in the world at a project, but if there isn't good leadership on site, you're not going to have good results. People can come into work every day and punch the clock and do their tasks, but if they don't feel appreciated or feel like they're working towards something, they're not going to perform well. So simple things like doing some employee appreciation,
Mhm.
delivering like some recognition in a group setting, getting like all teams together in a meeting, and sharing like your thoughts and feelings about the facility. Like, what do I like about the facility? What would I like to change about the facility? And people will mention things that you didn't even think of. Like someone's just saying, I need more scissors. And now you're listening to them and you're there and you're providing a safe vessel and container for this conversation. And then also like I cook for people.
Mhm.
Like, I think when you make something for somebody, they can see the care and love and intention that's been put into that. And so, like, doing barbecues are a great way to do team building. And then also another part of leadership is not being above doing the tasks. You know, like going in and doing some things with the staff to let them know that like I know how to do this and I'm not above this and I like helping. And you don't have to do it every day, you
Mhm.
know, but just getting in there and getting dirty and just being a cultivator um, is kind of like a way to lead instead of be a boss.
Exactly. So the data is key, like I always say, but people is what actually implements the change you want to see.
You know, people can be the greatest assets in the garden, and they can also be the biggest pests in the garden. And I firmly believe that there aren't bad employees at cultivation facilities. There's only bad management, misguided management, poor training materials, and poor like process materials. So it's rare that there's bad employees. It's more common that there's bad bosses or bad management. And I'm
Right.
not saying that they're bad people. They're just having like a different look at it, and if they're stressed out about what's going on, they might not be thinking about like how their stress is kind of affecting the people within the operation. And I'm only speaking from experience. I've had my hair on fire, you know, like I've been stressed out and running around running and gunning, and I forget how that can impact the environment around me.
Yeah.
So learning from those mistakes, and also observing people go through the same scenario, I would say, you know, just remember that at the end of the day, you're a leader, and people are looking up to you or watching you, and they're going to follow your lead. So if you're apathetic and you're stressed out all the time, they may also be apathetic or stressed out all the time.
Yeah. The tone starts at the top. I agree with that.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's no punching down. Never punch down ever, because these people are supporting you, and so you got to support them, and love and appreciate them.
Amen to that. Well, on that note, people are probably going to consume this for weeks to come. If someone has any questions or they want to reach out to you, maybe see about you, you know, helping them level up their operation, how can they contact you?
So you can hit me at apex_growth_solutions, or you can hit me up at DJ_systemic. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Don't be offended if it takes me a minute to get to them. I'd like to get to all the questions, and there's no dumb questions either. There's no dumb questions. So, and a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So if you have anything that you want to know, feel free to reach out, and I'll try to get to you as soon as I can.
Awesome, cool. Well, if you're a home grower and you are interested in just kind of trialing our Solus spot check sensor, measures EC, water content, and substrate temperature, you can hit up Forever Green Indoors on Instagram. They're our exclusive distributor for Solus. They're also selling through Amazon, and that's a good place to get started if that's something that you're interested in. If you really have a passion for crop steering or you're just curious. If you are a commercial facility looking to commercialize, go to aroya.io/demo. It's a portion of our website that allows you to just throw in some basic information, and our team will get right back to you and let you know. Maybe they'll set up a demo with you to just kind of walk you through it online, what the power of what this data can do. And Eddie's a great resource. He's a great partner of ours. I appreciate your time. So thank you, Eddie.
Hey, much love. Thank you very much, Alex, for having me, and look forward to continuing to steer the direction of the industry with you guys.
Awesome. We'll do this again and again soon. So thank you so much. Talk to you later, guys.
All right, everybody. See ya. Bye.